elements to an Android Studio app. First, open up your Android Studio project and you will go to App. Under that folder, you'll click on SRC. You'll open up Main and you'll find two folders in there. One is the Resources folder, which is called Res, and the other one is the Java Code folder called Java. If you continue opening up the packages, you're going to find a controller package, which has the CIS but client activity. That's where the code for your app is going to reside. And then you can go to res and then content main XML, and that's where the GUI elements are going to be dragged and dropped into your screen so that you can build what your screen is going to look like. Now, I want to start with the button. So I'm going to grab a button from the left side. There's buttons and other elements on this left side, and I can just drag it into the screen, and it's going to give me a very angry warning saying that this is not constrained. So I can right click on inside of this button and I can organize it, I can center it, and I can constrain it. For now, I'm going to center it horizontally. So I will put it right in the middle of the screen, and it's still going to be upset at me because I don't have any vertical constraints. I can do a few things. I can constrain this to, say, the top of the parent, the bottom, or left or right, but I don't want to do left or right because I've already constrained horizontally. So maybe I want to do top of the parent. And at this point, it's going to give me a constraint of 56. So it's always going to be 56 points away from the top. I can change that over here on the right side. If I go to the top constraint, I can just give it a constraint of 16 points, which is typically what we do, or we can use 8, which is also very common within apps. Let's say that I want a different button. Now I can drag and drop the new button over here, and then that button will need to be constrained as well. Now I will right click on it if I want to, say, center it and put it right under here, let's say. Or if I wanted to lay them side by side, what I'm going to do is that I will want to set the constraint at the top to the same amount as the other one. So that would be 8. And then I want to set a constraint to the right. So it's going to connect this button with this button, and it's going to give it a constraint from this button to this one. What I can do is I can set a set constraint from that one about 16, which gives me a nice looking interface, and everything is sort of centered around the main button. So the main button will always be centered, and then the other ones will be 16 away from this one. So 3 buttons could be centered if we do that. Again, I drag my button, I create a constraint of around 8, and then I constrain this button to the left side, and I will want to do 16. And now my buttons, regardless of what the screen size is, they're always going to be constrained nicely at the top, and they're going to look for 8 points from the top, and the middle one will center itself. The right and left one will constrain themselves 16 points away from the middle one. Now you'll still notice though that we have some errors, and what it's given me is that there's a hard-coded string button that says, and then that's not a great thing to do. So instead, what we can do is we can just click on fix, and what it's going to do is going to create a constant for this button, and we want to give it a good name. So maybe we're going to give it a name of like add friend, and that is going to live in the strings.xml file. So in Android, when we keep our constants, we put them in the strings.xml file. So now we've got add friend. We can again fix the left one, and we can say delete friend. And we can give it a string of delete friend. Okay. And then you see how it's going to grow. It keeps its constraint even though it's a bit longer now. And then for the last one, we're going to say lookup. So now I have 3 buttons. They're slightly strange because this one's longer than the other ones, but they're still constrained in the center. You can continue to work around with the length of each one. You can make them all be the same length, but I won't do that for now. And instead I'm going to click on the first one, and I want to make sure that it has a good ID so I can look it up later. So this ID is going to be lookup button. We'll go with add friend or add button or add friend button, up to you. And then we will go with delete friend button. In this spot, we are now ready to create the code for these buttons, and we'll be able to do certain things with them. If I go over to my CISBook client activity controller, and I double click on that, you'll notice that I have a few things. This is on create. On create lets you put some code in before the screen is going to be shown. So, and right before the screen is shown, on create is called, a bunch of stuff can be done in there. For my CISBook client activity, I want to have some instance variables. That way I'm able to access these buttons from different methods as opposed to just one local method like this toolbar that you see here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a button instance variable. This is going to be called lookup. Now here in onCreate, I'm going to instantiate that lookup button. So I will go lookup, and perhaps I want to do something better than just lookup button. There you go. And I want to find by ID res folder dot id dot add friend button, delete friend button, lookup button. So all I'm doing here is creating an object with find by view ID. That object is going to be the GUI element that has the ID called lookup button, and it's going to create a button object and store it in this instance variable, which is now accessible to the rest of the class. Now that I have that lookup button and I've found it and connected it, I am now able to tell that button what to do. So one of the nice things that we can do is create a method called setUpButtons. I will call that method in onCreate, and I am going to create listeners for those buttons in the setUpButtons method so that the buttons work. So I will go and create a private void because I don't need it to return anything. SetUpButtons. It will not take any arguments. And so now that I have my lookup button instance, I will create a listener for it. Now, what's going to happen with this listener is that whenever anything clicks on that lookup button, then this code will run. So I'm setting this button so that this code will happen. And for that, I will need to add a new onClick listener. Make sure to write in the word new and then view.onClick, and then you'll notice that there's going to give you a sort of like autocomplete. Go with the autocomplete, it's much easier. If you want to write it all out, you may, but it's some syntax you need to remember. So view.onClickListener is an object, and we're going to create that object. So we're creating a new onClickListener object, and we're overriding the onClick method within that object with something that we wanted to do. What I would like it to do is perhaps just ping the server. So I created a method called ping the server below, and then that method will run whenever I click on that button. I could also use other methods that do different things, like contains friend. This is going to ask me, or going to give me a string telling me if it contained friend. You can do other things within these buttons as well. So let's say that I go back to my content main and I want to display this answer. Or perhaps I want to get information from the user as well. So then there's two options that you have. The first one's going to be just the text view. If you bring in the text view, this is where you can display some information, and we can go ahead and um, fix the constraints very quickly. So we can constrain it to the middle one again. It's nice to have sort of one anchor where everything's being constrained to. And then we're going to right click on it and we're going to center it horizontally so that it's nice on the middle of the screen. And then we can come around and get this plain text one, which is an input that the user can use. And then we can say constrain this one horizontally as well. First, we could do, say, either parent top or just the normal horizontal vertical constraint. I'm going to put it right in the middle of the screen. So I'm going to do vertically in parent. If I didn't do in parent, it's going to pick the closest element. And that's not quite what I want. So I want to center it within the parent as opposed to center it from the bottom to the next element. So now that I have these constraints, it's going to be upset about a few things. It's going to say you don't have any autofill hints, you don't have any accessibility, and your constant for this is not set. So do you want to fix it? You say yeah, and this one we're going to call input field. So in that sense, we can set autofill hints, and that's where it shows something inside telling the user what they should do within that. Now we go to the other text view, and that text view we can fix the same problem where there's a constant that's not very good, and it's just called name. We can set it to something that's more useful. So in this case, I'll call display name text. I'll click OK, and now my app is happy, and I have no errors left. I'm going to go to this one, and I'm going to give it a new ID. This one should have a descriptive ID that's very similar to what you've given it before. This one's called display name text as of now, so let's give it an ID of display name. And then this one, it's called edit text number 2, and instead we want to say input name text field, perhaps. That would be a good name for that. And the string is still name. Let's change that string to something different. Input name. I'm not sure why it didn't get fixed when we used it before. And then you'd have to go into the XML file to fix that. I'm not going to do that right now, but you may. There is no accessibility label right now, but you can ignore that. Go into your code, and now that you have 2 text fields, you can create some instance variables for them just like you did before. So we have an edit text. That edit text is going to be input name field. Then we go into the constructor, we look for that name, and we say find view by ID RID dot input name text field. So we're going to get that object, and then we can also use the text view, and that's going to be display name view perhaps, and we're going to go with display name view find by ID r.id dot, and then we're going to find the text field, and we've got that. Great. So here I'm going to print something out to the system just to make sure this is working. So button clicked. I will also, whenever this button is clicked, instead of calling something right away, maybe I want to get text out of the input field and then call that method. So I'm going to use my input name field dot get text dot toString, and I'll say user input. And perhaps you're looking for a specific friend, so I'm going to say contains friend, and I will modify this to use that name that's coming in. And instead of just looking for Edwin, I will want to look for the user's input. Now, I've run my program. I will get my emulator, and it's running here. And I will try and see if this button's working. So this is a lookup button. And I will go to my console, and it's going to say button clicked. And it looks like everything is working there. Now I will stop my emulator, direct user input. I will print out the user input. I will run the app one more time, get my emulator. This is the hint that we had. You can change that hint if you want. I will click on my name, and I will look it up. And it's going to say input Edwin, so I was able to get the correct input, and I